All right, let's go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's work group on the fiscal year 2022-2023 Clean Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project, or HVIP. My name is Andrea Morgan, and I'm the policy lead for our Clean Truck and Bus Incentive Project, which is better known as HVIP. I'm joined today by several other CARB staff and our partners at CalSTART to share some of our thoughts and hear your feedback on policy changes for HVIP for the upcoming fiscal year. Before we get started, a little information on work group logistics. Today's work group is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on CARB's low carbon transportation webpage within the next 2 weeks. Today's work group is really intended to be a conversation, and we will not be presenting slides. Throughout the afternoon, we will pause for questions and comments, and at that time, we will ask that you raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. CARB staff will then unmute your line. For those of you participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand. You may also use the Q&A box to ask questions. We'll remind you of these instructions throughout the work group, and as always, we appreciate your patience if we run into any technical glitches. Now, a little background on HVIP. HVIP is designed to accelerate market transformation by reducing the purchase price of zero-emission heavy-duty trucks and buses for California fleets. And HVIP, paired with regulations and other incentive programs, has proven very successful at doing just that. Over the 12 years that HVIP has been providing incentives for fleets, we have seen incredible growth in the availability and demand for zero-emission technologies. The zero-emission trucks and buses supported by HVIP have helped achieve substantial greenhouse gas reductions and have helped address air quality needs in California's most impacted communities. HVIP also plays an important role in preparing the market for regulations by increasing market adoption and decreasing vehicle costs prior to regulatory deadlines, such as those for the Innovative Clean Transit and Advanced Clean Trucks regulation. HVIP voucher incentives complement other programs in CARB's heavy-duty funding portfolio by providing a streamlined application process without requiring the scrappage of an existing vehicle in most cases. As the early commercial technologies that are supported through HVIP achieve greater acceptance and market penetration, they are graduated or moved to other programs within CARB's incentive portfolio, such as the Carl Moyer program or the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust, which focus on turning over the existing fleet. The landscape for zero-emission trucks and buses has changed dramatically over the past several years, and HVIP has changed accordingly. Each year, we reevaluate our strategy for HVIP, taking into account changing market conditions, upcoming regulations and regulatory deadlines, program needs, and funding availability to ensure that our limited dollars have the greatest impact possible and that we are supporting equitable investments. These policy changes are incorporated into our funding plan for clean transportation incentives, which we anticipate taking to our board for consideration in November. As we contemplate policy changes, we look to HVIP's guiding principles to guide our investments. These principles are: accelerate market transformation for the cleanest advanced technologies, support the goals laid out in CARB's long-term heavy-duty investment strategy, drive purchase decisions, maintain simplicity and a fleet-friendly process, support CARB regulatory programs, avoid market disruptions caused by unpredictable funding availability, graduate established technologies, and support more equitable investments. Today, we'll be discussing several potential policy changes to HVIP, including modifications to voucher amounts, the fleet size limits, which were approved by our board last year, changes to purchaser requirements, the potential for requiring vehicle-to-grid capability, and potential changes to our school bus set-aside that are under consideration. We will not be discussing the innovative small e-fleets pilot in detail today, as we expect that feedback and lessons learned from its launch, which is anticipated to occur in early summer, will guide any policy changes to ISIP for the coming year. We expect that the innovative small E fleets, or ISIP, will continue to play an important role in piloting new strategies to better support small fleets and independent owner operators during the coming fiscal year, and we anticipate continued funding for ISIP. We have a lot of material to cover today and limited time. We know that there is a lot of interest on the fleet size limits. So to help ensure as many folks as possible are able to share their comments, for the fleet size limit topic, we will be asking commenters to keep their comments under 2 minutes. If we get a lot of raised hands for other topics, we may institute time limits for those topics as well. Keep in mind that this is not the only opportunity to share feedback with CARB. If you have additional comments, you are welcome to send them to me via email. And I'm also happy to schedule a time to meet outside of the formal work group and workshop process. Before we get into greater detail on the policy changes under consideration, I'd like to turn it over to Tom Brotherton of CalSTART to share an update on the status of HVIP funds and some statistics on what we saw during HVIP's reopening on March 30th. Tom?
All right, thanks, Andrea. First, let me go back about a year and we'll recap what happened last year in 2021. In 2021, we opened to about $225 million of new voucher funding. And we decided to split it up under 3 separate windows of voucher requests in June, late summer, and finally October. And over the course of those 3 different and individual waves, we sold out almost immediately in each time. And in fact, it was only a matter of 10, 15 minutes before we sold out our final wave in the fall. So there was unprecedented demand back in 2021. We then opened up again this summer in June for new voucher requests in 2022 with a lot more money available. If you remember, about $225 million last year, this year we've got $478 million of voucher funding available to give out in 2022. Now, one big difference this year is that funding has been split into a series of funding buckets so that it isn't just open to all voucher requests, but there are actually budgets for different kinds of vehicle types. And I'll run through what some of those budgets are. For traditional HVIP, which is really open to any kind of vehicle, we had $197 million. For transit agencies, we've got $65 million. For drayage trucks, $70 million. And for school buses that are in small and medium air districts, we've got $122 million. As Andrea mentioned, we also have a small pilot project called ISIP, the Innovative Small E-Fleet Pilot Project. That will open with $24 million this summer. It's got a whole new set of rules and really is intended to try to get to the market with some of these innovative financing options that heretofore aren't really part of HVIP, but that we feel could be important in the years to come, especially in serving small fleets. So how have we done so far? So on the opening day, we issued $225 million of vouchers in that first day. As of today, we're up to $371 million of demand. We still have funding left. There's about $83 million that has yet to be requested of the FY21-22 funding. Now, the breakdown of the money that's left is about $13 to $14 million is for conventional standard HVIP. So any vehicle, any fleet size can apply. We've got $17 million that has to go to fleets of 10 or fewer vehicles. And that count includes the new voucher requests. So those are pretty small fleets in California. And then finally, we've still got $53 million left for public transit agencies in California. So some of the bigger numbers of requests so far this year in HVIP have been Class 8 battery electric drayage trucks. About 550 have been requested so far this year. That's on the heels of about 500 last year. So that is really amazing because this is a product that really hadn't been in the market before last year in much of any growing numbers whatsoever. And now between last year and this year, we're already up to about 1,000 voucher requests for zero emission drayage trucks. So that's a really strong showing. In school buses, the $122 million for school buses in small and medium air districts has been fully requested as of today. That's a pretty substantial number. Now, the voucher amounts for the small and medium air districts set aside are higher than that for conventional HVIP, but they do require scrappage. So there's really more requirements on a school district, but more money available as well. School buses can also be requested by anybody, any size school, any size air district in conventional HVIP, using the very same voucher amounts that we've used last year. So altogether, school buses are also a big, up in the 500 and greater number of voucher requests this year, on the heels of some very large numbers last year as well. So that's a pretty big category this year that we see really following the same as last year. Finally, step vans and cargo vans have also showed an increase. For the first time ever, we've had Class 2B vans eligible in HVIP, which is a single vehicle, the Ford E-Transit, and we've had requests there. So that's a new category, a new eligible category in HVIP, and we've seen some pretty good demand so far in that category. So that's a summary of what we've had so far this year in HVIP. As I mentioned, I want to stress there's still money available, even though last year we sold out in a matter of minutes. Luckily this year, here we are a month later after opening up, and there's still money left. So if you're interested in requesting vouchers this year, please talk to a dealer in HVIP, get a voucher request in because money is still available. Andrea, we still have some time for some questions.
Great, thank you, Tom. So let's open it up and see if anyone has any questions on that update.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Zoom call. For those of you joining by phone, please press pound or #2 to raise your hand. If you're joining by the Zoom webinar platform, please use the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. First up, we have Zachary Khan. Zachary, I've unmuted your mic. Zachary, you'll need to unmute on your end as well.
Oh, hey, sorry. Actually, this is Andy Schwartz. I may have gotten the link from my colleague, Zach. Yeah, Andy Schwartz of Tesla. Yeah, I was curious, Tom, if there's any breakdown in terms of the number of vouchers by fleet, allocated by fleet size. Yeah, there's any data you could share there, that would be of interest.
Yeah, Andy, we're still going through and tabulating that information. So we have only gotten through about 40% of the voucher requests. The problem here is we get some incorrect data. So oftentimes a dealer might give us, say, the size of the fleet of just one group within the state of California. The numbers that's relevant from a regulatory perspective are the total number of vehicles under common ownership by that fleet in California. And so we've got to go back and confirm that data with each individual fleet. A voucher request comes in through the dealer, so oftentimes the dealer doesn't have the accurate information. So unfortunately, Andy, we don't have really up-to-date accurate data on fleet size right now. We're scrambling week by week to get that information because it's really the data that everybody wants. But right now, we don't feel that we have an accurate feel on what that data is today.
Yeah, understood and appreciate that. I guess the other thing that would be helpful with that data is, and I don't know if this is easily available or not, but just understanding what is the allocation of vehicles by fleet size in California, kind of writ large, to the extent we're trying to assess, whether a proportional amount of vouchers are going to the different kind of vehicle segments by fleet size. So having that kind of benchmark would seem to be useful given the concerns that a number of stakeholders have around the fleet size limits.
Right, that's a good idea, Andy. I don't have that number handy right now.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, thanks. And again, sorry for that name confusion on the,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Up next, we have Erica Baker. Erica, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you could quickly repeat the update you gave about how much funding has been requested in the school bus set aside.
Right. So the school bus set aside, and let me go into a little detail of how that works, because it really is different than the way conventional HVIP works. So in the set aside, we actually get requests directly from school districts. It doesn't come through dealers. And the way we call that application Part A. And really what a school district is doing is they're saying, I'd like to get, pick a number, 10 new electric school buses. And they haven't chosen a particular bus make or model yet. But what they are doing is verifying that they've got the appropriate vehicle that is eligible to be scrapped, because that's a requirement of this set-aside project. So what we've received so far, we've actually had about $132 million worth of interest from school districts in the small and medium air district, but we've only got about $122 million of funding available. So we've actually we've stripped the available funding already. $132 million of demand for $122 million of available funding so far in this small and medium air district set aside project. And then to carry on with this process, after a couple months, we have those individual school districts who have been approved with their preliminary application to then select a vendor who would then provide that electric school bus, and then we approve that bus as part of the project. So it's a little different than the way conventional HVIP works.
Okay, thank you. And these are applications that have not been approved yet. You're just going off of how many Part A submissions you've received?
That's right.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more raised hand, and then it looks like we have a number of questions in the Q&A box, so we'll run through a few of those verbally. So Aria, could you queue up the next raised hand?
Yeah, up next we have Roman. Roman, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. Hey, Tom, Roman Partia Lopez with the Green Lining Institute. Just a quick question on the vouchers that have been deployed in disadvantaged communities. Looking at your website, it says 60% of vouchers have been funded or deployed in pollution and overburdened communities. Is that the same as disadvantaged communities and AB 1550? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
right.
We're using the Cal Enviro-Screen DAC definition.
Gotcha, great. And then just a quick follow-up on this. With AB 617 communities, you talk more about any of outreach or increased efforts that you all have undertaken? Feel like there's a lot of community emission reduction plans that have identified transitions over to zero emission vehicles, and so just curious if there's been any coordination with those efforts.
So yeah, we've been participating in some of the 617 meetings around the state, and at those meetings, we certainly make it known to the other participants in the meeting that HVIP funding is available. Don't forget, these 617 communities have their own funding that comes through air districts. So one of the things we're trying to do is help coordinate some of the rollout of zero emission vehicles, not only through HVIP funding, but through the 617 funding that comes through air districts.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
All right, and then looking at some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A box, a number of questions about data and when fleet size data will be available. So as Tom mentioned earlier, that is something that we are working very hard to try to verify, and we'll share as soon as we can. There was another question asking, is there a plan to allocate the amount to different categories if they're not used completely towards the end of the year? In most cases, the funding that was in the set-asides, for example, the set-asides for school buses, transit buses, and drayage trucks, The legislature actually directed us to spend those dollars on those categories. So we will keep those funds in those categories, but we'll continue to look at our outreach strategy over the course of this year to make sure that we're spreading the news that this funding is available, because we know there is high demand for zero emission vehicles in those categories. So mostly want to make sure that we're using these set asides as a method to make sure funding remains available for these different categories. And especially when you look at public transit and other public agencies, procurement cycles can make it a little difficult for them to compete in the standard pot of HVIP funds. So we'll continue to keep that funding available for them and work with them throughout the coming year to make sure that we're putting those dollars to good use.
Andrea, let me just say that you're exactly right, especially for transit. The value of an HVIP voucher does not cover the incremental cost of a zero emission bus. So many transit agencies have to come up with another funding source that could happen at different times of the year, go through competitive procurement cycles that can last 6 months easily. So we understand that when we happen to open up HVIP, may not be the appropriate time for a public transit agency to be ready with an active procurement and active purchase order that can then tap into HVIP. So we fully expect that transit will end up using HVIP funding, but it's not going to be necessarily coinciding with the timing of when HVIP opens up.
Thanks, Tom. There's an additional question in the Q&A box asking how many vouchers have been converted into actual trucks in service. I don't know if you have any data offhand on how many vouchers have been redeemed to date that we could share.
So I can tell you that, say in the last half year, we've probably paid out about $20 million of paid vouchers. So in general, this is sort of interesting based on the effects of the pandemic. We saw that the supply chain really did constrain the delivery of all trucks, not just zero emission trucks, but all trucks and buses, frankly. And so the payout of vouchers, we still have many active vouchers that are in the process of being produced, but we have seen deliveries slow down over this last year, especially since the fall, probably since the fall of last year. There's been a slowdown in deliveries. And what we've heard from our manufacturing partners is this is largely due to supply chain constraints. And there are just specific parts that they're waiting on to complete a vehicle before they can deliver it. So even though to date we've delivered, say from inception, more than $200 million of vehicles, we still have a backlog today of over $500 million of vouchers that have not yet been paid. And so that's quite a big number. Now, most of that money is money that was issued between last year and this year, but we have seen a slowdown over this last, especially 7-8 months in the redemption of vouchers.
Thank you for that, Tom, and thank you for those updates. I know we haven't had a chance to get to all of the questions in the Q&A box, but I do want to move on to make sure that we're able to continue on with the agenda. There were also a couple of questions in the Q&A box on which agenda topic we're on. So we're just wrapping up the HVIP status update agenda item. And we'll move on to voucher amounts now. So we have not yet talked about V2G requirements or any other topic on the agenda. We'll continue moving through those today. So now to discuss voucher amounts. HVIP vouchers are intended to offset a portion of the incremental cost of advanced technologies. Every year, we reevaluate our voucher amounts to ensure that they are set to an appropriate level to impact purchase decisions and to take into account any changes to technology costs. In 2020, we made significant changes to HVIP's voucher structure and amounts for all vehicle classes. On average, voucher amounts were reduced by 20%. This year, we are considering several changes to voucher amounts targeted to specific vehicle types and classes. First, we are considering extending the 25% voucher enhancement for zero emission drayage trucks so that we would continue to offer $150,000 vouchers for zero emission Class 8 trucks performing drayage operations through December 31st, 2023. This voucher enhancement first took effect with the launch of Project 800 in 2021, an initiative designed to help jumpstart this important segment by supporting the purchase of 800 drayage truck orders in California in 2021. While we have now surpassed that goal, transitioning drayage trucks to zero emission remains an important priority to support Governor Newsom's executive order N7920 and to provide benefits in California's most impacted communities. Secondly, we are considering introducing a similar 25% voucher enhancement for zero emission refuse trucks. As with drayage trucks, this voucher enhancement would be available for a limited period of time, and it is intended to support the early deployment of these relatively new to market technologies. While 7 manufacturers currently offer zero emission refuse trucks, voucher requests for this market segment have been relatively low, with less than 50 voucher requests for zero emission refuse trucks to date. Refuse trucks are present in all of our communities, but their impacts are felt particularly strongly by communities located near waste transfer stations who are burdened by multiple pollution sources. We envision this voucher enhancement being available until December 31st, 2023. Third, we are considering adjusting the voucher structure for electric power takeoff technologies to better accommodate their use in heavier applications and their use on zero emission trucks. Electric power takeoff, or EPTOs, allow for zero emission operation of ancillary systems such as cranes or compressors on a vehicle, resulting in significant emission reductions. Specifically, we're considering adding a new funding level for EPTO systems with an energy storage capacity of greater than 30 kilowatt hours and setting the voucher amount for $50,000 for this new higher energy capacity class. Currently, the highest energy capacity tier is 15 kilowatt hours with a voucher amount of $40,000. We're also considering allowing EPTO systems to fund up to 65% of the total incremental cost. Currently, HVIP limits EPTOs to covering no more than 50% of the incremental cost. And finally, we are considering reducing voucher amounts by 10 to 20% for Class 3 vehicles. Class 3 vehicles, or vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating of between 10,001 and 14,000 pounds, are frequently used in last mile delivery applications. Currently, the voucher amount for Class 3 vehicles is set at $45,000. We're considering reducing voucher amounts in this category because as purchase prices for this category have decreased over the past couple of years, we're currently covering a higher percentage of incremental cost for this vehicle class compared to many of the other heavier vehicle weight categories. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thanks, Andrea. First up, we have Dusty Garland. Dusty, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, it's Dusty Garland from Peterbilt. You mentioned the EPTO voucher for EPTOs placed on diesel vehicles with battery storage for those. Has there been any consideration of increasing voucher amounts on EVs that come with EPTOs on them as well, since those purchasers are really using the same application and going EV with it, and there is that incremental cost to add an EPTO even to an electric vehicle?
Yes, so that is something we're definitely interested in making sure that we're supporting. And we think that creating this new tier for EPTOs that have an even higher energy capacity would also help support the application of installing EPTOs on zero emission trucks. So it is definitely something we're interested in making sure that we're able to support. And we'd be interested in any comments or thoughts you have on other changes to the program that we'd need to make sure that we can get EPTOs on zero emission vehicles.
Okay, so currently, does that mean the idea is that you would apply for a voucher for the vehicle and also apply for a voucher for the EPTO that will go on that vehicle if it's using the battery storage, the same battery storage the vehicle's using?
I think we would need to look into it a little bit more, but I believe that yes, that would be the case. We have heard some concerns that EPTOs that are installed on an electric vehicle may still need additional battery capacity, so that you're ensuring that the vehicle also has continued range and is able to make it successfully to destinations as well as perform its ancillary operations.
Okay, and just a final comment, just for information on that, it would seem that when you get into the refuse vehicles and a bonus there, likely just about every one of those refuse vehicles, really all of them, are going to have an EPTO as well. So then there would be the vehicle, the bonus for refuse, and then the EPTO if it's taking from that larger battery storage. So something we can discuss further, but that should probably be looked at as you get further into refuse, since that'll affect that market heavily.
Thank you, Dusty. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, Andrea and Dusty. Next up, we have Mark Baer. Mark, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Question about the current requirement for a 540-day delivery and awareness that supply chain is not meeting expectations. So wanted to get a feel for the consideration to extend that maximum delivery.
Sure, and perhaps Patrick Chen, if you'd like to weigh in here too, but I would say we do provide some flexibility within HVIP, recognizing that there are occasionally challenges with delivery and undergo case-by-case consideration of offering extensions after learning more about the circumstances. So Pat, do you want to discuss a little bit of what that process looks like now as we do that case-by-case evaluation?
Yeah, so basically you reach out to Tetra Tech for an extension. They'll reach out to us. We'll ask for questions, and yeah, we just collect information and go through the case-by-case evaluation, and it's done on a subjective basis. Yeah, I think you covered most of it, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Philip Gibbons. Philip, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. This is Philip Gibbons with the Port of San Diego. I just wanted to vouch for my support for including the 25% increase for drayage trucks. I think that's important for the fleets that need to be the first adopters of these vehicles. That $150,000 incentive makes the total cost of ownership more compelling to them. So I think that's a great idea. I do want to ask a question about the definition of a drayage truck. Sometimes the Air Resources Board may not always consider every type of Class 8 truck that moves freight at a port as drayage. So for example, auto car hauling type vehicles sometimes are not classified as drayage truck, but they do visit our seaports. And I think those are important to also receive a higher level of voucher. Because often our ports are located in the communities that are considered disadvantaged, and the more trucks at our ports that can receive the higher incentive is going to be important. I'd also say that I support the increased voucher for EPTO. I can't specifically speak to whether $50,000 is good or not, but anything we could do to help on that side is important. At the Port of San Diego, we happen to have a lot of trucks that use power takeoff. So having that ability, I think will be wise in the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for those comments. And with respect to what we're considering a drayage truck, the types of trucks that are eligible really for the 25% enhancements are Class 8 trucks that are performing drayage operations. So we check for information to ensure that the Class 8 truck is registered within the drayage database. We can certainly consider your feedback on opening that up to additional truck types that are serving and operating in the port. So thank you for your comments there.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lacie Robertson. Lacie, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you so much. Lacie Robertson with Rush Enterprises. Quick question on the proposed voucher enhancement for refuse trucks. Would anyone eligible for those for the refuse enhancement still be bound by the future fleet size limitations?
Yeah, so at this point, we are still considering having the fleet size limits be in effect and have the refuse trucks continue to be subject to those fleet size limits.
Okay. My recommendation would just be to allow refuse for the carve out, if your goal is to get a lot of these refuse trucks out there, to allow larger fleets to apply for those enhanced vouchers.
All right, thank you for that comment, Lacie.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Andy Schwartz. Andy, I've unmuted your mic.
Hey, Andy Schwartz with Tesla again. Thanks again for the time here. So a key concern that Tesla has been on the record about with regard to this program is the program sustainability. So ensuring that funds are available to support medium and longer term investment decisions, and then also kind of the efficient use of funding. And let me just step back and say that I'm speaking to this issue from the perspective of a company that is in process on commercializing a Class 8 vehicle. So I don't necessarily speak for other categories, but at least for that category, I struggle with kind of the structure of the program, which sort of has a one size fits all incentive level, basically for a given category, despite having wildly different all electric ranges or battery sizes or things like that. And so I guess I was just wondering if there has been consideration of shifting to a structure that ties the incentive amount or calibrates it to things like the all electric range of a vehicle or the battery size, or even kind of in a more ideal world, the anticipated emission reductions that one might anticipate from a vehicle. Because the current incentive structure just strikes me as incredibly crude relative to other incentive programs that I've seen in the energy space, for example. So yeah, just curious what the kind of thought process has been there, and if there's any appetite for considering a more fundamental reform, maybe not wholesale, but perhaps even just on a pilot basis.
Hi, Andy, and thanks for those comments. That is something that we have looked at both again this year and in past years as well. One of the main goals that we have with HVIP is to make sure that it is something that is simple and fleet friendly. And as we add different layers of taking into account battery capacity or mileage, it tends to make it more complicated for fleets and smaller fleets to understand. I will note that HVIP is just one of many incentive programs in CARB's broader portfolio. And we do have some programs out there that really function and operate in a manner that's a lot closer to what you described, taking into effect what the cost effectiveness is of the technology and achieving emissions reductions. And so We do have those options out there within these other funding categories, but we've typically found that it's harder for small fleets in particular to access those funds and understand some of the complications there. So while it is something we've thought about, we do want to maintain this as a pretty straightforward and simple fleet-friendly program that has low barriers to entry for those medium and small fleets.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. You know, I think I guess I don't know if I agree that you know, providing a lower incentive for a vehicle that has, you know, half the range of another vehicle in the same class is, you know, overcomplicating things. And it just seems that, you know, ARB itself has acknowledged that the key cost driver, you know, is the size of the all-electric battery or all-electric drivetrain, including the batteries. So it just seems in terms of like reasonable use of funds, you know, it would make sense to calibrate it to some measure of the vehicle's capability, not just kind of a flat incentive irrespective of that capability.
Thanks, Andy.
Next up, we have Dan Chow. Dan, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Dan Chow, representing Arrival Automotive. As CARB staff well aware, we're in alignment with Tesla and also Rivian is a part of our small coalition that have been pushing for some of the reforms that Andy mentioned. Picking up on just this last back and forth, Andrea, I mean, you know, consumers within the CVRP program can, and even low-income consumers who are accessing, you know, the low-income portion of CVRP or Clean Cars for All, presumably understand, you know, variable rebates for different technologies, different ZEV technologies, different ZEV technologies, and CARB staff, I believe, is also considering ranged-based incentives currently, at least as articulated in the last funding plan. It's on the agenda for consideration. I'm not sure what the status of that is. So it you know, and then you also mentioned, you know, the working through dealers. In applying for this program, you know, wouldn't that provide a buffer for some of the complications or, you know, complexities associated with variable incentive amounts? It just doesn't seem like that's a high enough concern, given you know, GHG emissions, given the incremental emissions that we believe structuring or restructuring the program could lead to. And as Andy pointed out, you know, the imperative to be, you know, obviously good stewards of limited public dollars, no matter how large a budget you may have. So would respectfully urge staff to reconsider this particular issue. And we also, I would, you know, note that Sierra Club is also opined in this regard. We support their comments that they submitted to staff on April 14th. They touch on many of the issues that we have been urging CARB to reconsider, including the fleet cap issue. I know that's probably next on the agenda, but in any event, wanted to kind of call out some of those comments by the Sierra Club.
Thanks, Dan, for raising those comments and your thoughtfulness and discussion there. I will note too, we do within HVIP have a pretty similar structure to CVRP currently in offering different incentives amounts to different vehicle classes as well as different vehicle types. So we would offer a lower incentive amount to plug-in hybrid vehicles should any of them join HVIP, and also offer lower amounts for remanufactured vehicles or conversions of vehicles. So I think there is some tie-in between what we're doing with HVIP and what you see with CVRP already. We will, of course, continue to think about the feedback that you provided on range and battery capacity as we continue to move forward with this year's funding plan. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Andrea. It looks like we have several questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. First up, we have a question from Brittany Ruddick. With the HVIP 18-month deadlines to deliver, I'm not aware of any manufacturing companies not having issues with supply chain. Given this issue, is there any flexibility with delivery timelines? If so, what would be the process to collaborate with HVIP on this?
Yeah, so I think we spoke to this a little bit earlier. We do have some flexibility within HVIP to allow for extensions on vehicle deliveries. Those are approved on a case-by-case basis, and you can email Tetra Tech to request an extension or case-by-case review.
Thank you. Next up is from Adam Browning. Is there a possibility of making more money available this year in the event that funds run out?
Yeah, so that is a great question. The answer is possibly. So we are still in the process of, well, the state legislature is in the process of considering the overall state budget. So the funding that Tom spoke to earlier that we had when we opened up HVIP is all of the funding that was available for fiscal and approved last year as part of the fiscal year 21-22 budget. Depending on when the legislature approves the fiscal year 22-23 budget and what is included in that, we may be able to do an early allocation of a portion of those funds to support the continued availability of incentives through HVIP. But again, we have to see what the final budget is before we could move forward with that.
Thank you. We have a question from David Lawhorn. We have been seeing issues with workforce development and training existing workers and new hires on this new technology. Is there an incentive to offer funding for this training in these vouchers? Are some set asides for this type of training?
So at this point, we do not have set-asides associated with workforce training and development within HVIP. It is something that we have been thinking about and how to best execute. So we're certainly interested in additional feedback or suggestions from stakeholders on how we can move forward with that.
From Samantha Balish, is there going to be difference between allocating funds for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles, or both will be combined under one category, ZEV?
So we do not currently, and we're not considering creating a set aside within HVIP for fuel cell electric vehicles. However, recognizing that fuel cell electric vehicles are in an earlier stage of commercialization, we do offer higher incentive amounts for fuel cell electric vehicles compared to battery electric vehicles.
From Beverly Deschaux, are there requirements for V2 building / home?
I am not entirely sure what you mean by that, Beverly, but we do have V2G requirements as a later item on the agenda today. So I suggest bringing it up again then, and hopefully we can get you a better response when we understand the question a little better.
And then from Mark Bayer, any I believe we've answered this question already. Any consideration to extend the 540-day delivery requirement?
Yeah, I think we responded to that already. We do anticipate, we do provide some flexibility on HVIP delivery timelines, and extensions may be approved on a case-by-case basis.
And then we have a comment from Roman Partida Lopez. Moving forward, it would be great to see slides that support the data/information you're sharing. I think it's important for CARB to start having slides as part of these work groups that are available days before to help prepare for these meetings and have meaningful discussion.
Thank you for your feedback on that, Roman.
From Bradley Northup, is the reason for suggested reduction in HVIP vouchers for class three vehicles related specifically to the sector of last mile delivery? Class 3 vehicle sizes are a currently underrepresented size class of vehicles and fleets, more specifically to municipal and service fleets. Reducing HVIP amounts in this class based on a single segment's reported costs is not advisable and would limit the ability of fleets to procure class 3 vehicles to plan for compliance with the proposed ACF regulatory requirements.
Thanks, Bradley. And no, we're not proposing or considering reducing the voucher amounts just because of their use in last mile delivery applications. Really, the justification for the reduction here would be as we compare incremental cost of this technology type to other vehicles funded by HVIP, we're seeing that the incremental cost we're covering a higher percentage of incremental cost for these class 3 vehicles. And in part, that's because we've seen some changes in what the overall purchase price is for those vehicles. And the last time that we did wider voucher reductions in HVIP, we reduced the voucher amount for class 3 vehicles considerably less than we reduced the voucher amounts for other vehicle classes. And that was in part a reflection of the technology status at the time. But we do think that we've reached a point where we should be reducing class 3 voucher amounts further now.
Thank you, Andrea. So just to keep on track, we'll let the remaining questions lie until a little bit later.
Thank you, Aria, and apologies to everyone whose questions we haven't been able to get to this point, but we do want to keep moving on the agenda and share updates. So next we'll be discussing the fleet size limits, which were approved by our board last year. Let me start by saying that the landscape for zero emission technologies has changed dramatically since ZEVs first became an eligible technology in HVIP. The first zero emission technologies to enter the market were met with very limited demand. And our goal was to ensure that HVIP vouchers were widely available to encourage any and every early adopter to purchase a ZEV. The early deployments supported by HVIP have helped build economies of scale, provide use cases showing zero emission technologies can be deployed successfully in a variety of applications, and have helped build support and interest in these technologies. As you all know, we have seen incredible growth in demand. Last year, $60 million was requested in 9 minutes. And this year, we saw over $200 million of voucher requests within the first 24 hours of HVIP reopening on March 30th. And it was not only large fleets requesting vouchers. Last year, about 40% of voucher requests came from fleets with 50 vehicles or fewer. And while Tom noted that we are still doing verification of data from this year, since HVIP's reopening this year, it appears that about half of voucher requests to date have come from fleets that were reported to have 50 vehicles or fewer. And while this increase in demand is exciting, it also poses a challenge of how to scale HVIP to ensure that funding is continuously available. The fleet size limits approved by our board as part of last year's funding plan represent one method we can implement to better manage demand within the program and ensure funding is continuously available to the medium and small fleets that rely on incentive dollars the most. We've heard many alternatives from stakeholders on other ways we can manage demand in the program, including reducing voucher amounts, introducing a tiered voucher system based on fleet size, basing incentives on electric range or battery size, or totally restructuring HVIP to be a competitive program where applicants who demonstrate the most cost-effective emission reductions receive funding. All of these options are valid ways to manage demand and help avoid market disruptions caused by unpredictable funding availability. But as we weigh the alternatives against the rest of HVIP's guiding principles, driving purchase decisions, maintaining simplicity in a fleet-friendly process, accelerating market transformation for the cleanest advanced technologies, supporting the goals laid out in our long-term investment strategy, and supporting more equitable investments, we believe the fleet size limits continue to best align with our guiding principles. We and many of you share the same common goal, deploying as many zero-emission vehicles as possible. And we have heard loud and clear the concern from some stakeholders that it may be too soon to impose fleet size limits, and that demand for zero-emission technologies comes from large fleets. But the data we saw coming from HVIP voucher requests last year and the preliminary data that we've seen from HVIP's reopening this year tell a different story. Per the fleet size limits approved by our board last year, beginning January 1st, 2023, only private fleets with 100 or fewer trucks or buses and public agencies will be eligible for HVIP incentives. Looking at the fleet size data reported by dealers as they submitted voucher requests, we find that if this limit were to be in effect when HVIP reopened this year, about 70% of fleets would have still been eligible to make their voucher request. In 2021, that number was even higher. 76% of fleets who requested vouchers last year would still be eligible under the fleet size limits that will take effect in 2023. This year, public fleets and private fleets with 100 or fewer vehicles requested over $100 million in HVIP vouchers, representing half of the total dollars requested from HVIP to date. Last year, voucher requests from these groups represented 57% of the total dollars requested. While, as Tom mentioned, we're still working with fleets to verify that the fleet size information submitted with their voucher requests is accurate, the preliminary data suggests that demand from medium and small fleets is significant. One of our primary goals for HVIP is to impact purchase decisions. And when you look at the factors guiding purchase decisions of larger fleets, who often have greater access to capital, they tend to consider a wide array of factors, such as the total cost of ownership, upcoming regulatory requirements, and corporate sustainability commitments when making a purchase decision. For smaller fleets with less access to capital, the initial cost of the vehicle is often the constraint that drives purchase decisions. While we will continue to verify the data that comes out of reopening and keep a close eye on demand in HVIP over the coming months, based off of this preliminary data, we still consider limiting HVIP participation to those medium and small fleets that are most reliant upon incentives as the best way to regulate demand within HVIP, to keep the program streamlined and simple, to promote equitable investments, and to impact purchase decisions. We are considering making a few minor modifications to the fleet size limits and HVIP as we shift the program to focus more on medium and small fleets. First, we are considering adding an exemption to the fleet size limits for nonprofits with 501c3 tax exempt status. We'd like to ensure that all nonprofits serving our communities continue to have the ability to request vouchers. Secondly, we are considering exempting voucher requests from small fleets with 10 vehicles or fewer from the manufacturer rolling soft cap limits. The manufacturer rolling soft cap limit was established in 2020 as a way to improve HVIP funding availability and encourage faster vehicle delivery. Under the manufacturer soft cap, each manufacturer can hold up to 100 unredeemed vouchers at a time across all of the manufacturer's HVIP eligible product line and approved dealers. As a manufacturer redeems vouchers, more vouchers become available for vehicles from that manufacturer. Manufacturers can also be granted additional vouchers by CARB beyond the cap on a case-by-case basis. Not counting small fleet voucher requests towards the manufacturer cap will help ensure that small fleet owners and operators who are interested in making the transition to zero emission can use HVIP vouchers to purchase the zero emission vehicle of their choice. Additionally, this will help HVIP approved dealers feel confident that the time they spend working with small fleet owners will be worthwhile and alleviate concerns that they may not be able to access a voucher for a small fleet because the OEM cap was exceeded. Before I open it up for questions, a couple of notes. One, I'm sure some of you noticed that the statistics I cited were really focused on the fleet size limit that takes effect in 2023 and limits participation of private fleets with 100 or more vehicles. In 2024, this limit is set to be further tightened to allow only public fleets and private fleets with 50 vehicles or fewer to be eligible for HVIP. Since we consider changes to HVIP policy annually and take needed policy changes to our board every fall as part of the funding plan for clean transportation incentives, we will continue to verify the fleet size data that is coming in from HVIP reopening and watch the market demand within HVIP over the course of the next year to see if any changes are needed to the 50 vehicle or less fleet size limit. I also want to remind everyone that HVIP is not the only CARB incentive program that offers support for zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. Other programs, including the Carl Moyer program, Volkswagen Mitigation Trust, and Community Air Protection Program, all also offer incentives for zero emission trucks and buses to fleets of all sizes. Many of these programs use competitive application processes like those suggested by stakeholders. But we know that the competitive programs or programs where applications are only accepted for limited windows can be very challenging for some fleets. And that's particularly true for small fleets who may have limited resources and for public agencies who face lengthy procurement processes. One of our guiding principles for HVIP has always been to keep it simple and fleet friendly. Targeting HVIP to those fleets who face the greatest challenges for adoption makes sense within our broader strategy. We're aiming for a total transformation of the transportation sector, and in order to make that happen, we need to be utilizing every program within our incentive portfolio. Finally, I know there's a lot of interest in this item and we have limited time to discuss today. So while we may not be able to get to everyone who would like to make a comment, we are asking all commenters on this item, please keep your comments to under 2 minutes. When you approach 2 minutes, we will give you a warning to finish your sentence and wrap up your thoughts. Please be as concise as possible and avoid restating comments that were already made. And if we're not able to get to your comments, please feel free to email me your comments in writing. And we'd also be more than happy to set up one-on-one meetings with stakeholders to discuss feedback on the fleet size limits or other areas of HVIP policy. With that, let's open it up for questions. Aria?
All right, thank you, Andrea. First up, we have Dusty Garland. Dusty, I have unmuted your mic and started your countdown. Dusty, you'll need to unmute on your end.
There we go. Thank you very much. This is Dusty Garland from Peterbilt. Just a curiosity and I guess a comment. I don't expect that you'll have this data available on hand. You mentioned the percentage of voucher requests that were for fleets of less than 50 trucks, both in 2021 and then again this year in 2022. And although that would make it seem like, hey, the majority of people requesting these are small fleets anyway, I would be really curious how that breaks down by class of truck. And if class 6, 7, 8, the larger class trucks, if that is still the case, that fleets of smaller than 50 are requesting those vouchers in a majority. But something that could be looked at, that if that's not the case and it's fleets of greater than 50, maybe there needs to be an exemption for the larger class vehicles, as those markets can be quite a bit different than the smaller classes.
Thanks, Dusty. That is a great comment. And as you suspected, I don't have that data in front of me today. And that is something that, as Tom mentioned earlier, we're still continuing to work through and verify. But it is something that we'll be looking at very closely. And we'll certainly take your feedback on if it does seem like there are big discrepancies, considering if we should make targeted exemptions to the fleet size limit under consideration.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next, we have Adam Browning. Adam, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you for that. Adam Browning here, representing Forum Mobility. First off, I do want to echo, I agree with Roman, it would be really helpful if you wrote some of these things down and provided us ahead of time so that we could have more considered feedback for you. I would just also ask on the subject of the fleet size, instead of so much of a focus on stopping the or limiting the participants that for whom this is working, but also making sure that you are providing avenues for an appropriate funding for the populations that have not yet had access. And I'm speaking specifically around drayage, where 75% of the fleet are these independent owner operators and are not receiving a proportionate amount of funding. And part of that is due to the fact that they're having trouble accessing the program due to the definition of a operator as a driver for accessing the funding. And I really do appreciate the ISEF program. I will just note that we're not sure that it'll work yet. We haven't seen the final program, and it is only 24 million, which if it is combined with the funding for accessing infrastructure as well, could be as few as 80 trucks. Which is nowhere near sufficient for making up for the 6,000 trucks that are going to be stricken from the registry at the end of this year. So just, before putting limits on the size of fleets, I would also hope that you would put, again, focus on and appropriate funding to making sure that it's accessible to the independent owner operators. And thank you for your efforts here, Andrea. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam. And yes, the definition of purchaser is something that we are considering. As you noted, we are really looking to the Innovative Small E-Fleets, or ISEF program, as a way for us to get a better understanding of how some of the models work that differ from the traditional sort of leasing programs, which are allowed through HVIP. And standard purchasing agreements. So before we start making major changes to HVIP, we do really want to see how this first round of ISEF funding goes, and get a better understanding of how some of these models work before we're funding at a much wider scale. And I do also want to acknowledge your comments and Roman's comments about having slides or written documents available. We know that would be helpful. I do want to note that we will, before our next workshop meeting, have a draft funding plan that will have all of our initial proposals written out in much greater detail, and that'll be released in advance of that workshop meeting. So hopefully that will be a good mechanism as well, to allow folks to really see what we're thinking and writing. We do like to use some of these informal opportunities to have more informal dialogues and get feedback on our initial proposals as well, but we'll consider that in the future. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Christian Corby. Christian, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize if I restate anything. I just got a emergency phone call from my office. So just quickly, I just want to say that, yeah, we support taking a harder look at the fleet size limits and potentially removing them if the demand suggests that it should. I recognize that it sounds like you have had a look at the preliminary data, but it would be really useful for all stakeholders to be able to see that as well, so we can have a little bit a better understanding of what the voucher demand looks like. And I did have a question, I guess, for you kind of explained that the fleet size limits is you still believe it's the best option for the program. And I guess I was kind of wondering, I understand that potentially doing a tiered system could make it a little different or a little difficult for public fleets or other fleets that smaller fleets that are less sophisticated and maybe need a little more time to put together their applications, which I completely understand and support. But could there be a way to do maybe a soft cap carve out for small fleets where funding would be made available on a continued basis for them, or if there could be some kind of limit that would be reached that would protect small and medium-sized fleets from being able to access funding while still not depriving large fleets of an option to apply after a certain time. I just wonder if there's a way, given the nascent stage of this market and that we're just really trying to get vehicles out on the road, and kind of the lack of public charging for medium and heavy duty vehicles right now, if there would be a way to kind of provide a little bit more flexibility in these coming years as the medium and heavy duty fleets transition. So that's just kind of
Christian.
if there was an option there. Yeah.
Christian, I'm sorry, you've hit your 2 minutes.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Thanks, Christian. And yes, so we've definitely thought about the potential for creating a set aside or some other mechanism to provide guaranteed support to small fleets. But one of the other things that we're really thinking about here is making sure that our dollars are actually impacting purchase decisions. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from fleets and others, particularly larger fleets, is that they would have made the purchase anyway without incentives. And that's really not the best use of our dollars. So we're really considering what the opportunity cost is of providing incentives, even at a reduced amount, to a larger fleet. Because if it's something that they would have done anyway, or something that they would be doing within a few years to comply with ACF, is that a better use of funds, or is it a better use of funds for us to ensure that we're getting the dollars to fleets that wouldn't be making this transition, or at least wouldn't be making this transition for a number of years. So again, we are going to be continuing to look at data as more of it comes in. And we do want to share that information with stakeholders once we have more verified data. But I appreciate your comments here, and it is something that we're taking to heart and thinking about. Unfortunately, I think we're going to need to move on to our next agenda topic, which is on updates to vehicle purchaser requirements. So in addition to fleet size limits, there are a few areas we're considering making changes to purchaser requirements. First, in line with the requirements of AB 794, all fleets requesting HVIP vouchers must be in compliance with labor laws. As fleets must attest that they are currently in compliance with all state, federal, and local laws, there's already an expectation within HVIP that fleets be in compliance with labor standards. However, beginning next year, there will be some changes to how fleets certify that they're in compliance with this requirement and how this requirement will be enforced. Specifically, we will begin to ask fleets purchasing drayage and short haul trucks to directly attest that they are in compliance with state labor laws, that they will remain in compliance with labor laws for at least 3 years or the duration of the incentive agreements, and that they will retain direct control over the manner and means for performance of any individual using or driving the vehicle. Fleets who receive an incentive will be required to attest that they are in compliance annually through the terms of the HVIP ownership requirement. Prior to awarding the HVIP voucher, We will also ensure that the fleet is not on the list maintained by the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement under Section 2810.4 of the Labor Code. Additionally, CARB will publish a list of all fleets that receive HVIP incentives, and we will follow up on any allegations received by third parties that claim that a fleet which received HVIP incentives is not in compliance with state labor standards. We are also considering extending the ownership and in-state operation requirement for vehicles purchased using an HVIP voucher from 3 to 5 years. When HVIP first imposed a 3-year vehicle ownership requirement, zero-emission technologies had just entered the market. Now, as the market has matured and more zero-emission vehicles have been deployed, we have greater confidence in the reliability of these technologies and believe it's appropriate to extend the ownership requirements. Extending the requirement an additional 2 years will help us ensure that vehicles are kept in state longer and that California realizes more of the benefits of its incentive dollars. Pairing with this requirement, we're also considering making adjustments to the requirements for the manufacturer warranty to better align with the minimum term for operation in state. Currently, manufacturers have the option of providing a warranty that provides protection for a minimum of 3 years or 50,000 miles, whichever comes first, or 2 years and 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. In both cases, the warranty must provide full coverage of the motor, propulsion system, powertrain, battery, parts, and labor at a minimum. As they do now, changes to the warranty requirements could provide the manufacturer some flexibility. Again, we're considering these changes in tandem with the changes to extend the purchaser ownership requirement. Really, the goal here is to ensure that purchasers could be confident that their vehicle would be covered throughout the term of the ownership requirements. So I'll pause now to see if anyone has any questions or comments on these potential changes.
Andrea, we have one question in the Q&A box from Erica Baker. Can you please repeat the warranty requirements?
Sure thing. So currently the manufacturers have the option of providing a warranty that provides protection for a minimum of 3 years or 50,000 miles, whichever comes first, or 2 years and 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. So in both of those scenarios, the warranty must provide full coverage of the motor, propulsion system, powertrain or drivetrain, battery, parts, and labor at a minimum. So we have not yet developed exactly what changes we'd be proposing to the warranty, but we expect that it would be to bring the term somewhere closer to the 5-year ownership requirement that we're considering for HVIP. And we can do this again in a way that provides some flexibility or options for the manufacturer, but we're very interested in feedback. And if anyone has any suggestions on how to make those changes or if such changes are appropriate or necessary.
Thank you, Andrea. And just as a reminder to everyone, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted within 2 weeks in case you missed something or need something repeated. We have one raised hand, Dusty Garland. Dusty, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. This is Dusty Garland from Peterbilt. A couple of thoughts of considerations on extending the length of time to 5 years instead of 3 years. And this may not be an issue if fleets of 100 or greater are excluded. But two things that is going to do is, one, it is going to lengthen the time until trucks hit a used market. And two, as technology advances are made, it is going to keep those fleets from moving to the technologies and creating that used market sooner. It would just basically delay it by 2 years. So if battery technology gets better or if ranges get better, or whatever it is that we know is going to happen at some point, there are those fleets, I think, that would be glad to move to that and possibly create a used market for fleets that otherwise could not enter electric vehicle markets at all. And it will prolong that by going from 3 to 5 years, as well as just create a little more hesitancy on some fleets, knowing that they're signing up for a longer contract, which usually makes everybody a little nervous.
Thanks, Dusty. And yeah, that was something that we were definitely thinking about as we were thinking about making these changes to the ownership requirement. One of the things that we looked at was the ACT, or Advanced Clean Truck Large Entity Reporting data, and which while I recognize that that was largely focused on diesel vehicles and not just zero emission vehicles, the data that we were seeing there suggested that most fleets, or about 88% of fleets, were holding on to vehicles for at least 5 years anyway. And the one segment of the market that was really keeping them for less than 5 years in a high quantities was for sleeper cabs. So it is something we're interested in, and if folks have data or information specifically related to zero emission vehicles and how long fleets are hanging on to them, we'd really be interested in as well. But we'll continue to be looking at impacts to the secondary market as we think about this proposal further.
Thank you, Andrea. Next up, we have Glenn Chow. Glenn, I've unmuted your mic.
Thanks. I would second, this is Glenn Chow from Toyota Motors North America. I would second what Rusty just mentioned from Peterbilt. I think there will be unintended consequences of that 3 to 5 year ownership change. And as Rusty mentioned, we do believe that it's going to impact the secondary market. I believe one of the end goals of the HVIP program, and also with CARB and with ACF and ACT, is to move the market away from diesel trucks, and expediting or keeping these trucks longer under single ownership will strain or decrease the used truck market. And we do believe this is going to lead to some unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Glenn.
I'm going to switch over to a couple of questions in the Q&A box. The first is from Brandy Sickler. What are the HVIP ownership restrictions? Will HVIP allow the purchaser to obtain financing, such as lease to own?
Yes, so HVIP does currently allow for leases. However, there are a couple of restrictions on that. The lessor has to identify who the end user fleet would be during the application process. And it's actually that end user fleet who would be working with the dealer to apply for an HVIP voucher. Additionally, for leases, they need to be for a term of at least 3 years. Similar to what is the minimum purchaser requirements and commitment to operate a vehicle in the state of California.
Thank you, Andrea. And then we have a question from Brittany Ruddick. In the event the program does change the warranty requirements, will the program be announcing this 6 to 12 months in advance so that OEMs have time to develop that warranty and add it to our product lists?
Yeah, so that is a really great question, Brittany, and that is certainly something that we can take into consideration, either delaying when the warranty requirements or when the warranty and purchaser requirement could take effect, because we do recognize that it is something that advance notice is needed for, so appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to raised hands. Next up, we have Mark Bayer. Mark, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Just a note, we offer extended warranties up to 5 years, and the customer pays incrementally for that. So I wonder if we're inadvertently driving up the cost, but maybe if the voucher reflects that, it would make sense, but I prefer to leave it up to the customer to choose their warranty. And thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Can you remind us of your affiliation?
Altec Industries.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, and unfortunately, I think we've reached our time for this item. So we're going to move on to our next topic, which is vehicle to grid functionality requirements. And I'd like to introduce Heather Choi, who is the lead for our public school bus set aside and one of our V2G experts in-house. So I'll turn it over to Heather. Heather.
Hi, thanks, Andrea. You hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thanks. So as Andrea mentioned, my name's Heather Choi, and I'll be talking about this next item, vehicle to grid charging, which is an innovative technology that is on the rise in a variety of applications. But this agenda item right now is going to be specifically only talking about school bus vehicle types in the HVIP vehicle catalog. Vehicle to grid or bidirectional charging functionality, referred to as V2G, and school bus projects continue to demonstrate a bright future for energy security. Following in the successful footsteps of CEC's school bus replacement program and the recent developments in both vehicle manufacturing and interconnection rules at the CPUC, V2G was introduced to the HVIP vehicle catalog as a required feature for the first public school bus set-aside allocation, which I will discuss in more detail during the next agenda item. There was no requirement that the recipients utilize or demonstrate bidirectional charging. The intent is to ensure that early recipients of the school buses will have the most advanced features and the opportunity to learn about this exciting new technology. In an effort to continue that momentum, we are proposing for discussion that all school bus vehicles eligible to be purchased with HVIP vouchers meet the same requirements set forth for the set aside as follows. And I'm going to read, three things here, but this information is also in writing on the California HVIP website in the implementation manual. I believe it's in Exhibit B. So there's a good little reference for you guys, but here it goes. First, each school bus must have the ability to charge with a level 2 SAE J-1772 charging. 2, each bus must be capable of vehicle to grid, bidirectional charging, and discharging via use of Type 1 combined charging system, or CCS, with a minimum of 60 kilowatt hours. And 3rd, the bus must be designed so that no hardware or firmware changes are necessary to allow the bus to immediately serve demand that is independent of the utility grid. 2nd. And 4th, the bus must be able to receive a remote update enabling grid interconnected V2G functions upon completion of applicable requirements for safe electrical interconnection. With regard to vehicles other than school bus types, we would not be recommending any changes to the other vehicles for vehicle to grid capabilities at this time. And so that concludes my general discussion on this topic, but I do remember that Beverly had asked a question earlier about any requirements for vehicle to building or vehicle to home charging. And just to that point, we're really only talking here about the vehicles in HVIP. We're not talking about any demonstration or proof that any charging actually happens once the vehicle is delivered and in use. So Aria, is there any questions that have come in about vehicle to grid functionality on school buses?
There are no raised hands, and it does not look like there are any questions in the Q&A box specifically about, oh, I spoke too soon. We have a raised hand. Brandon Bloom, I have unmuted your mic.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you so much, Andrea. Hi, Heather, appreciate the time on this. We definitely feel there's great opportunity with the school bus application and really future-proofing this technology. One question I had was, what kind of certification process would be put in place to verify that that bidirectional capability is possible with the buses that are being deployed in order to prevent equipment from coming into that might not meet that later down the road?
Right, that's a good question, Brandon. And because this is still new, we are working very closely with the Energy Commission and are keeping active conversations with CPUC and other state agencies that are touch on this kind of technology. And so we will be working towards, along with you and a lot of other people, towards those sort of requirements and those standards, so that the charging equipment that is installed will be clear on whether or not, you know, that particular bus will do any kind of fancy stuff like bidirectional charging, vehicle to grid or vehicle to building. So it's still in the works, and that's exactly the kind of stakeholder involvement that we look to you guys to also to provide. So I guess the only other thing I could mention is that this is also going to be dependent on Energize and CEC's next processes and what they're doing with this on the charging side, not just the vehicle side.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it, Heather.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon and Heather. We do have a question in the Q&A box. Oh, I'm sorry. Jessica Johnson is typing an answer. Next up, we have Beverly Deschaux. Beverly, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, this is Beverly Deschaux, President of the Electric Vehicle Association of Central Coast. I have a couple questions about the V2G. And hi, it's me again. I recognize you, but I don't remember your name, who was interested in that when I asked about it before. One is, do you know what manufacturers are actually producing the CCS charging for the school buses? Do you want me to ask them all at once, and then you can answer me all at once, or ask them one at a time?
I can answer that right now. I don't know if we don't have a specific technology provider for CCS plugs that I'm aware of. So that might be a broader question.
Yeah, okay. Nuvi in San Diego has something, but I forget what, because we were told that there were only CHAdeMO, but it's actually not true. So let's see. Are there any other permissions that you're aware of that we would need in order to be using the bidirectional with our school buses?
Yes, this is definitely not the only thing that needs to happen for the entire futuristic opportunities that are available with this. So that's why I was saying there's more work to be done with CEC and on the charging, the actual charger itself side, as well as with CPUC and with utilities being able to make agreements with, access to the grid from, a school bus to just access to the entire grid. So there's definitely a lot of other parties, that's what I was saying, that need to take in, that we need to work with to make sure that whatever we're saying needs to happen on a school bus or on the vehicle is also going to match up with whatever the other entities or the other parties that will be connecting with that vehicle. So I don't have all the answers, but that's definitely something we are making sure that we are address.
So the list of things that were required of the particular bus in order to get the HVIP funding, one of them was, I thought I understood it to be, can receive communications. Would that be for load shaping? In other words, that a communication could be sent to the bus if it were charging, and it would can lower its either stop charging altogether or lower the amount that it's taking for the charging in case the grid is needing more energy at that time.
Yeah, I mean, those are all, we're looking into this along with you, Beverly. So I appreciate your involvement in these, but yeah, exactly. We need to be able to look into, is there a charge management software that's going to be the best fit for these types of projects? So
there is
yeah.
such software, yes.
No, yeah, I know. But I'm saying, like, we need to make sure that we're not also being aware of other opportunities. So, you know, like we all know, these buses are spec'd out. They're really kind of customized. If you think about it in that way, where each bus is very different, where you put the charge port on the bus, you have to know where that bus is going to charge and where that port's going to go before that bus is built. So there's a lot of planning that has to go into account, and including this V2G option. And I just want to make sure that it's very clear that the reason why we're not requiring any demonstration after the fact. So we're not requiring your school bus is delivered, now show us that it's going to charge. Obviously we want it to charge, but show us also that it'll, you know, do some other fancy stuff. That's not part of this initial step. It's really just getting what we think is the minimum of what the school bus is going to need in order to keep moving with this advanced technology and as it's advancing. So I hope that makes some sense too. Did I answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. Is CARB actually working with the utilities? And it sounded as if you were working with the CEC. And how could I get connected with the CEC on this matter, if you know?
Oh, is anybody from CEC on the line? It's one thing to know how to get in touch with ARB and CARB. Yeah, you're like, how do I get in touch with CEC? I know that they have workshops and forums too. Beverly, I'll get in touch with you after this meeting. Yeah, let you know how to get.
So are you in fact working with utilities on this? Because for one thing, we understand that if the facility that was having the school bus that was using the bidirection, you know, I'm interested in the microgrid aspect. We're told that the CPUC and the utilities actually don't have any control over them, but they are asserting that they do. So, if you know anything about that?
Oh, it's gonna sounds like fun, huh?
Yeah.
No, my group here that works on school bus projects, we don't directly work with utilities, but we have a lot of working groups and forums that we hear feedback from, that like SoCal Edison has their charge ready transport industry working group. So we do participate in that way.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Beverly and Heather. There are no more raised hands and there are no more questions about V2G functionality in the Q&A box.
Okay, great. So then I'm going to go ahead and move on because it's me again to talk about the next item, which is the public school bus set aside. Ready? Yes. Okay. So I'll be sharing recommendations for administering the second year of 3 years of new funding allocated for the deployment of a total of 1,000 zero emission school buses in rural and underserved communities in California. The legislative intent behind these funds is for the school districts to have access to zero emission vehicles and charging infrastructure. CARB and CEC are working to create a total package for school district bus fleets that includes seamless applications, aligned timelines, and eligible products. Charging infrastructure funding and assistance for the school buses awarded from the set aside will be implemented through the Energize, spelt with 2 I's, program from the CEC. As you heard from Tom Brotherton of CalSTAR earlier, the first year of the allocation launched just a month ago with overwhelming interest from both the school bus manufacturers and the school bus owners. I first described the school bus set-aside program back in January of this year. If you are unfamiliar or in case you forgot, the school bus set-aside is administered alongside standard HVIP. The set-aside follows the appendix implementation manual, and there are quite a few similarities to standard HVIP, like ownership, telematics, voucher processing is handled by the vendors, and the CARB-approved vehicle and more. But it's the differences that I will highlight now. For the first year, which just launched, the main differences from standard HVIP are, first, the participants in the set-aside will select approved school buses from the vehicle catalog that meet specific requirements regarding vehicle-to-grid technology, as I was just talking about. The voucher amounts also range from $350,000 for a Type A to $400,000 for a Type C or Type D school bus. An old school bus must be scrapped, and that old school bus must be model year 2007 or older of any internal combustion engine type. Third, eligible applicants are school bus fleet owners that support public school transportation located in rural and underserved communities. Building on the 2019 and 2020 Rural School Bus Pilot Project, project location was determined by which air district in California the school bus served, specifically determined by the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association as small and medium-sized air districts. Applications from the schools located in both a small air district and a disadvantaged community, as defined by Cal Screen 3.0, are prioritized, and once selected, will move to the next step in the process. After 90 days of opening, the rest of the eligible applications will then be evaluated in the order they were received. So now I'll talk about the main policy recommendations for administering the second installment of $135 million for the school bus set aside. As mentioned, the first year launched, so these recommendations may change as lessons learned are realized. There are a few changes, though, we want to consider in order to improve program effectiveness. First, in all of our incentive programs, we strive to achieve the right balance between offering enough funding to incentivize the purchase of cleaner equipment and grow early commercial markets, with the simple mathematics that lower voucher amounts can help the dollars go further and help send key market signals toward viability outside of incentives. To make sure the school bus set aside is balanced in that way, we will evaluate voucher amounts and possibly make adjustments in order to respond to market changes, as well as to ensure we are able to help as many school buses be replaced as possible. We will track purchase order prices from both HVIP and other grant programs to help inform the voucher amounts for the second year. Are there additional considerations around voucher amounts that you suggest we should consider? Hold your answers for a few minutes. Second, as you know, the oldest school buses in the state are of highest concern, especially for public health reasons. In the past, we have heard comments, and even today, that older school buses owned by underserved public school fleets may be missing out on funding because they do not meet our traditional definition of rural. We have typically defined rural as school bus fleets in small and medium-sized air districts who typically do not have as much access to funding as those in larger air districts. We will be looking at the school bus inventory in the state to gauge where the oldest buses are located, and would like your input on any other objective criteria we should consider besides air district size. Are there other metrics like average daily attendance or free or reduced price meal program enrollment we can utilize to help formulate the prioritization of eligible school bus replacements? Thank you for listening today. I have finished sharing the main policy recommendations for the second year of this exciting funding opportunity in our state. I look forward to hearing any feedback or suggestions and questions from the audience now. As a recap, we are assessing voucher amounts for the school buses funded by the set aside and considering broadening participation eligibility. That is it. So Aria, I will turn it back to you for any questions and comments from the public.
Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any questions as it relates to the public school bus set aside, and there are no raised hands.
Okay, I love it. So then I guess, well, we can go to next steps with Andrea, but obviously if anybody last second wants to ask any questions about the school buses, I'll still be on the line.
Well, how about as we're waiting for folks to raise their hand and formulate their great comments and feedback on school buses, we take a look at some of the questions that we have in the Q&A box that we weren't quite able to get to yet.
All right. I'll start from the top. We have a question from Adam Browning. Where can we see comments filed by other parties? Dan Chow referred to a Sierra Club filing on April 14th, question mark.
Yeah, so that is a great question, Adam. We don't currently have a formal docket that comments have been submitted to. And folks are informally emailing the comments to me. However, those are all part of the viewable public record. So you're welcome to request to see copies of comments submitted by others by shooting me an email or filing a public information request or Records Act request.
Next up from Jason Caranto. If there is a tiered Class 8 system based on range for ZEVs, would it be fuel neutral between hydrogen and plug-in?
Yeah, that is a great question. It is, so we don't currently have a range-based system in existence in HVIP for ZEVs. So that is something that we could think about. I can say that currently we do offer higher incentive amounts for fuel cell vehicles simply because they haven't reached the same level of market penetration as ZEVs, and they're much earlier in their commercialization process. So creating an additional incentive amount if we move to a mile basis is something that we could certainly consider for fuel cells. But again, that's something that we're still thinking about and isn't, so we need to work out the details there if we do decide to go in the direction of having a range-based incentive amount, which isn't our current proposal.
From Brittany Ruddick, advance notification to OEMs when adding required tech for HVIP funding, having a technical requirement window so that the R&D department has time to develop, test, and release those new capabilities takes time. Having a grace period would be helpful.
Thank you, Brittany. That is duly noted. I know you also had a follow-up in here, a follow-up question tying to my previous question on advance warning to OEMs. We would be grateful for advance warning about new technology requirements, especially those which will enable additional funding. Our R&D department needs a minimum of 1 year to develop new tech and test thoroughly. So thank you for those comments.
Okay. From Bradley Northup, with regard to funding that was allocated for EVSE in the recent Energize and EV Fast Track, was there a specific thought or reasoning to why a fleets needed a vehicle purchase in order to submit for EVSE fund requests?
So that is a great question, Bradley. Unfortunately, we are not the best people to be answering that question since the Energize and EV Fast Track program are run by the CEC. So I'd suggest reaching out to the CEC team, and I'm certainly happy to help make those introductions to get additional information on their thinking and suggest policy changes in the future. Or Heather, go ahead.
No, sorry. I wanted to answer a question live after you were done.
Okay, Heather, I see that you'd like to answer Keith Lowen's question. Why is the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 not used for the $122 million in bus vouchers? The worst pollution is in LA and San Joaquin Valley, but those areas are precluded from being granted bus vouchers as they are large air districts.
Yeah, sorry. And sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you there, Andrea, with that. I just wanted to make sure that I answered this question because Keith did ask it much earlier in the meeting, and I had said, oh, we'll get to that. So before the meeting ended, I wanted to make sure I answered his question. So the question is basically, how are we choosing which school buses get the $122 million from the first year of funding? And the Rural School Bus Pilot Project was one of our the projects that really helped the legislature realize what is still needed and what's working in the state. And so we looked at that project definition for rural. There's not a very clear definition, one definition for the whole state on what rural means. So for school buses, we looked at also the location. So in the smaller and medium-sized air districts, those do tend to be in the rural areas. So more North Imperial Valley, North Unified Air Quality Management District. So we're thinking of these smaller areas that typically also have less access to local funds. So Los Angeles and San Joaquin, those air districts are quite large and they have a lot of other funding that they have available to them to use towards school bus purchases. And so that's just sort of give you an indication of where this has been coming from. But knowing that there are school districts who are also rural, but reside, maybe closer to LA or in the San Joaquin Valley, that they might have access to the same funds as other school districts, but for whatever reason, they just weren't selected to receive funding from that air district for their school buses. So I'm just trying to give you a little bit of history, and that's one thing that we want to address with the second year is how can we take into account, maybe think of a different metric or different mechanism to identify ways to also reach school districts in larger air districts. Sorry, there's so many districts in this one. And then the last point I wanted to make is that we are utilizing Cal EnviroScreen for prioritization. But we're looking at, for the first year, we were prioritizing disadvantaged communities who in small and medium-sized air districts. So it's like an overlap of trying to get the funding prioritized as best as we could. So I do take what you have brought to our attention, Keith, to heart. We are also have been trying to think of this in different ways as well, how to determine rural. And that's why we were asking for feedback on whether or not, maybe different metric like attendance numbers, population density, kinds of things like that too could take into play. So anyways, just wanted to give you that history, a little bit of history on where that designation has come from before.
Good. Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Okay, I'm no longer muted. Great. Andrea, I see you've popped on camera.
Yes. So let's we're getting pretty close to time here, so I'm going to go ahead and do a final wrap up. So as a reminder to everyone, there is still plenty of time to share feedback on HVIP policy changes and the fiscal year 2022-2023 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. On July 21st, we expect to host our second workshop on the funding plan for clean transportation incentives. Before this workshop, we will release a draft funding plan, which will include our preliminary recommendations for funding allocations and policy changes to projects, including HVIP. The draft funding plan will serve as a guide for the conversations that we will have at the July 21st workshop. We expect to release the proposed funding plan in October with board consideration in November. These dates are all still tentative and they may change, so please keep an eye out for GovDelivery emails and check our website for updates. I'd encourage everyone to subscribe to our GovDelivery emails if you haven't already. I will put a link to where you can sign up to that in the chat. And again, I'd really like to reiterate that our doors are always open and we're happy to meet outside of the formal workshop and work group process to discuss HVIP. So with that, thank you all for your participating in our work group today and sharing your thoughts and feedback. And have a great afternoon.